Hey everybody, it's Jason McClaren with the Leadership Loading podcast with my guest today, Bob O'Connor, better known as Robert. So Bob, welcome to the show. Bob is not a veteran like most of our guests, but he has written a book about veteran issues based on true stories. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But Bob, first let's start about, is this your first book, and then what led you to write the book?
This is my second book. I wrote a book, a nonfiction book, a few years before this one called Gumption Aid. I was, working off Gatorade and the old-timey word gumption, and that was kind of a self-help book for uh, executives and other people who read. And and then having done that, I found out about the existence of enlisted entertainers in World War II and decided to write fiction to explain that to my audience.
Right. And then what drew you to military book, writing a military book?
Well, my father was a veteran in World War II, as was his younger brother, my Uncle George. So I always knew that, my family had served. And then I wanted to address specifically things related to the United States Army in World War II because we'll never see the likes of it again, but, the Army was larger than the Marine Corps and the Army Air Corps and the Navy put together. So the Army really represented a cross-section of America as a whole. So, so I was interested, even though there's incredible stories to be told about Navy and Marines and the Army Air Corps, I was really interested in the basic United States Army.
And so what the book's called, sorry, I don't have it right here in front of me.
No worries. The book is called Jeep Show, A Trooper at the Battle of the Bulge. And just to explain the title, um, the Army in World War II had an organization called the Morale Corps. The Army was very, very concerned with the morale of its soldiers, both rear echelon but also, of course, the frontline combat soldiers. And one of the many programs the Army put on to maintain morale was Jeep shows. And Jeep shows were put on by enlisted entertainers, MOS 442. Three of them would pile in a Jeep. They would be driven to just behind the front lines where they would do kind of a mini vaudeville show, Jason, for frontline combat troops that had been brought back for a hot meal, possibly a uniform exchange. So that was, finding out about that. And by the way, I've talked to several World War II historians and many, many, many World War II buffs, and none of them have ever heard of these enlisted entertainers. Obviously, the USO and Bob Hope are very famous. They did brilliant work during World War II, but these enlisted entertainers, of course, they were under orders, did entertainments in areas where civilians could not go.
All this kind of reminds me of the Captain America movie where they had Captain America go out and do all the USO tours, and he's riding a Jeep a lot of the time, so it kind of reminds me of that. So I'm wondering if they took some creative liberties with that.
I have not seen that. I will say a much older, very famous movie with Bing Crosby um, in it has starts off with Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye essentially doing a Jeep show for about 100 troopers and 100 soldiers. And it gets a little Hollywood towards the end of the show. The movie is a White Christmas, a very famous movie. So I need to see that Captain America. But yes, essentially these enlisted entertainers were traveling to the front lines and doing shows for frontline combat soldiers. And you probably know, and your listeners probably know that a lot of things don't make it to the front lines. A lot of the best, certainly a lot of ammunition makes it to the front lines, but not always a lot of the best food, not always a lot of the best uniforms and that. So this was especially meaningful to to the frontline combat soldiers was this entertainment, making it all the way to them.
Definitely. I know the book mainly focuses on morale building, and I know that's a big part of leadership is knowing when your team needs morale, whether it be in the military or when you've gotten out of the military. I know right now, my full-time job, I have a team that I have to keep morale up. We call it employee engagement, but it's,
Yes, yeah,
it's
yeah.
really morale. And, we do, free burgers. Like a couple of days ago, we had free hamburger day because it was National
Hmm.
Hamburger Day. So all the leadership cooked hamburgers for the teams, and it showed that, hey, we're giving you a free burger, but
Yeah.
also we're the ones serving you today. Gives them some feedback there.
Well,
This
there's an important leadership lesson there that I learned from researching these Jeep shows, which is, um, if the leadership is there cooking burgers, obviously that's pretty low risk activity. I guess you can get burned. Um, but it's not really the burgers that count. It's really that the leadership is present. The leadership is spending time with the frontline folks, the folks that are, doing the hands-on work, talking with the customers. And what I learned from my research about these Jeep shows is, yeah, the frontline combat troops really appreciated having a nice little 90-minute vaudeville show, especially if Mickey Rooney was doing it. But what they appreciated more was just these guys coming all that way and being present. So after the show, they'd all, smoke half a pack of cigarettes, drink a pot of coffee. It was the fact that, being present with the frontline folks. And that's a leadership lesson that a lot of it's easy to forget about with the kind of schedule that you get if you're in a leadership position, especially with a large organization. And of course, it's not just what it does for the morale of the frontline folks. It also improves your own morale and gives you a chance to find out what's really going on out there rather than, whatever gets filtered back to you by the various chains of communication. So, yeah, whether it's grilling hamburgers or doing a vaudeville show within artillery range of the Germans, it just as important as the hamburgers or the show is just the physically being present.
Yeah, and as you get more senior in leadership, you have to actually block time. I know that's when I've gotten to some of my positions, I actually block time on my calendar. Hey, I'm going to go around with my
Yeah,
guys. I'm
yeah.
going to go do certain things.
Yeah, yes, yeah, it's absolutely, and probably block more time, since all jobs expand to fill the amount of time available, that's you should probably block a little more time than you're comfortable doing. Uh, uh, when I first got to Procter and Gamble, that was my first job, was marketing with Procter and Gamble. They would send us inexperienced, bright, eager young people. We would go out and we would be sent to work with a veteran sales rep. And you'd spend the day, in Pittsburgh or St. Louis or wherever it was with a really veteran sales representative. And he or she, in one day, you could learn more about how the business actually worked than 6 months back at headquarters. So again, the getting out there and being physically present is a fundamental leadership lesson. Uh, by the way, Jason, have you ever heard of James Stockdale, the former Navy pilot? Um,
No, I can't say I have.
he was a highly decorated Navy officer, won the Medal of Honor. He was the highest ranking POW captured by the Vietnamese during the war. So as the highest ranking officer, he felt himself and acted responsible for the morale of all the other POWs. And they were virtually all flyers and virtually all pilots. And I read his book about 10 years ago and just I thought it was so valuable. And one of the points he made is that to maintain morale, communication among people, and even confession. So these men would be tortured by the North Vietnamese, and they would be tortured into admitting more than just, their name, rank, and serial number. And, we would all think we would do our best to not tell other things, but after about the third hour of intense torture, you know, people break down. What Stockdale insisted on was that after the prisoners returned from their torture session, they would communicate. And by the way, they communicated via Morse code, tapping on the walls of their cells. These are heroes. Um, they would communicate what happened and what they said. And the reason Stockdale insisted on that is, and it's a morale thing, Jason, once you make your confession to your buddies, to the guys going through the same thing, and you're unburdened. You hide your humiliation, your weak, your understandable, weak moment, and you're very burdened with that. So I strongly recommend to any leader reading Stockdale's book. It's called Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. My copy of it is highlighted. Almost every page is highlighted. So, that's another important thing about leadership and morale is communication and the ability to discuss failure as well as success.
Yeah, and I think we have several episodes about communication.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think, like you said, the morale there on that team. I think I've heard that story before, just not the book. And
Yeah.
I remember the Morse code thing and just having to communicate that way. And like you said, they built up their morale even though they couldn't do things together.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. And it was Stockdale's personal, it is a responsibility. Morale of the people is the responsibility of the leader. And, that was an example of, under extreme circumstances, the leader really executing that well.
Yeah, and I think modern times, a lot of us, and when we're in the military, we have morale patches or morale T-shirts, morale baseball caps that you're allowed to wear sometimes, depending on
Ah,
your unit. So you'll see, like especially pilots, they do. Any new class will get custom patches, for morale patches
hmm.
based on something that happened during their class time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
Shared
an inside joke.
experience.
Yeah,
Shared
inside joke or
experience.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a fundamental thing I learned about morale of frontline combat troops, and this may also have been true of Army Air Corps crews, um, and Navy sailors in the Navy in combat situations. But what they would say is at the end of the day, they weren't really fighting to restore democracy into Europe. They weren't fighting for grand, for the people back home. Day to day, minute to minute, they were fighting for their buddies. Their main concern was, the welfare of the other guys in their squad. And that was their main motivation. And that's where morale, that's the fundamental of morale. And, this goes in civilian life and it's probably in the Bible somewhere if we look hard enough. But it's really about caring for the people you're with, you're in your family, in your squad, what in your, whatever it is. That's the number one source of morale is trying to do the best you can for the people you love. And I use the word love loosely in that way, but for the people that are important to you.
100%.
Yeah.
So we've touched on the book a little bit. It's based on
Yeah.
a true story. And where can people find the book?
The book's available on Amazon, of course. Enter Jeep Show book in the search bar. It's also available on bookshop.org, and for people that don't like Amazon for whatever reason. I did an audio book version of it, and by the way, for any of your listeners writing a book or thinking about writing a book, it's always good to do an audiobook version because you find all the typos that you thought you got rid of in the eighth draft, but when your book is read out loud by somebody else, you're stopping about every page and a half. So the book's available and as an audiobook, and it's available, of course, as a ebook and a printed book as well. But that's where they can find it. And I'm donating $1 per copy sold to a veterans organization called Shields and Stripes. Shields and Stripes exists to help veterans and first responders, and you know well the overlap between veterans and first responders who are going through mental and physical health crisis. So I'm giving them $1 per copy sold. I told them at the time I would give them all the profits from the book, but that $1 per copy was way, way, way more.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
We'll put all those links in the show notes so people can just
thanks.
click on them and go to it and
Thanks.
get there. And then I'm guessing people can reach you at your website also.
Yeah, it is jeepshowbook.com. There's a comment section. I'd love to, I just love comments, especially from veterans.
Awesome. We'll get all that going. And Robert, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, really my pleasure. Thanks for a great show.
Hey, everybody. This episode of the Leadership Loading Podcast was brought to you by Go Heroes Inc., goheroes.org. If you'd like to be a sponsor, go ahead and check out our website or email us, and we'll get you all the information you need.
There are thousands of leadership and management podcasts to choose from. We're glad you chose the Leadership Loading Podcast, a Go Heroes production. If you'd like to support Go Heroes Inc., visit www.goheroes.org. And with that, it's time to wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We sincerely hope you liked it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Let's all grow together. Thanks for listening to the Leadership Loading Podcast. Leadership inspired.